Again, speaking on the subject from verse 10, when I am tried, shall I come forth as gold? Job writes in verse 10 of chapter 23 of Job, but he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. It's an interesting passage of Scripture, a little more than halfway through the book. And by this time, Job is kind of beaten down. He is disgusted with the encouragement of his friends. He has been accused and accused and accused of having something wrong in his life. He knows the integrity of his heart. He knows what he is. And he writes in verse 2, he answers Eliphaz and Bildad and Zophar and Elihu. And he says in verse 2, even today is my complaint bitter. Now this complaint that he's talking about is not murmuring or grumbling against God. But what he is saying is what he is going through is hard. And that complaint, bitter, means that the trial that he is going through is very, very difficult. You know, it's very easy for us to speak to someone else's trial and to try to tell people how to get through it. And his friends thought they knew. Their only explanation for first losing all of his kids and losing all of his possessions — he was a very wealthy man — and now losing his health was there had to be sin in his life. And that's an age-old thing. That's what people look at. And Job knows that that's not the case. And so he writes then in verse 2, he says, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. I remember my best friend who passed away, died of cancer, bone cancer. I think I've mentioned this before when we were in high school, about my sophomore year, they decided to put in a system in our school. And I went to Christian school. And that system allowed John to be able to hear the teacher teaching at home. But every so often, our teacher would go over and she would just turn off the monitor. Because if she didn't, we in the class would actually hear John groan because of the pain of the cancer. And so Job is saying here, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. The word stroke relates, it means hand. So what he is saying is the hand of God is so heavy upon me presently that that's more difficult than, it's louder than my groaning. In other words, my groaning, or let me explain it, let me put it a little bit different way. I think this will make it clearer. What he's saying is, you hear my groaning, but the problem is much worse. How I feel, the groaning of my soul, the expression of the difficulty that I'm going through from the moaning or groaning of the pain that I'm experiencing, actually the trial's more difficult than it appears. I cannot imagine the suffering that Job experienced. It's beyond description. You know, I've been in ministry long enough that I've seen pretty much almost any kind of situation. Being a hospital pastor, I mean, I've seen things that I had never dreamed in my life I would ever see. I remember one of our men pulled a lady from a burning car, and she was taken to the hospital, and he happened to know the hospital. He was driving at that point for Coca-Cola, and he saw her. He pulled her out, told me about it, and so I decided to go visit her. Well, when I walked in the room, I mean, literally she looked like she was a skeleton. Her face was melted off. I almost could see the bone of her face. I was just, and I've not forgotten that picture. She didn't make it. She did not survive it. She wound up dying. And I tried to share the gospel with her. But Job not only went through physical suffering, Job went through emotional pain that very few people, I think, have ever gone through. I do not believe that Job's children were heathen. I don't believe that when they were eating and drinking in their house that it was a drunken party. I don't believe that at all. I believe that his children were godly children. Job was an amazing example. I believe that the only reason his wife lost faith in the Lord and that she was just telling him, curse God and die, was because she couldn't stand as a wife to see her husband go through the kind of suffering that he was going through. And she just said, you know what, just ask God to take you. I can't stand to see you this anymore. Well, added to all of that was the assessment of these friends of his trial. And from their perspective, all that they could do to figure it out was from a human standpoint. They couldn't understand how God would allow something of that magnitude to come in Job's life. Now, Job made this statement in verse 10. He says, when he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. I'm not going to go into in depth into scientific dissertation on how gold is purified. But when gold is put into a crucible, the hotter you make the gold, the more heat, the more alloy or more impurities or more dross is driven from it, and the purer the gold. So, let's just put it down kind of where the rubber meets the road, kind of where we can wrap our mind around it. Some gold is 10 karat. Some gold is 14 karat. Some gold is 24 karat. Technically, based upon what I just said, what would be the difference? How hot it was heated. 10 karat is not anywhere near the value of 24 karat. So 10 karat still has a little bit of impurity in it. It's not as pure. Because the heat that they used to process it was not as intense. And so Job is looking over his life. On many occasions, he probably has asked God the question, and God has not answered the question. God, am I going to survive this? How much longer do I have? How much more am I going to go through? How much more can I take? And his friends, there are points. There are different chapters that you'll find that he actually, at one point says, miserable comforters are ye. And they still don't get the message. They still hang around. Okay, just will not encourage him in his difficulty. He continues and he explains the magnitude of what he is going through. Verse 3 says, oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Now, the premise that he is giving is he is referring to court. He's referring to bringing a brief before God, not to present arguments and to complain to God, but to have his day before the Lord to dispel what his friends are saying about his trial so they can understand what he's going through. And if you go to the end of the book, God does just that. But God had not, at this point, been finished with Job. He still had more. There was still a little more alloy to get out of the gold. And so Job is, as he's addressing his friends, and he's addressing himself, and he's addressing us through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, anybody that would read this, he writes, I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say. In other words, he's saying, if I could get before God right now, if I would present my arguments and I would stand before him, I'd like to hear what he would say. I'm done with what you are saying. Is what he's saying. So he's kind of trying to get us subliminally get across to these friends of his, just stop talking, because you're not helping. I don't need what you say. And Job is saying, I'm not interested in the opinions of man about my trial. I want to know what God, what his perspective is. I want to know what he would say. And I like what he writes. I think this is very encouraging as we go through difficulty. In verse 6, he says, will he plead against me with his great power? In other words, is that who really God is? Because this is the premise of Job's friends. Job's friends talk about how austere God is, and how he's God of judgment, and that's all they can talk about to him. And you have done something seriously wrong, Job, because if you had not done it, then God would not have allowed this to happen in your life. And that's just not true. Okay? And so he says, what would he say to me? Would he plead against me as a judge? Would he sentence me and cast judgment upon me? And listen to what he writes. No. But he would strengthen. He would put strength in me. And what he's saying there is he would strengthen my cause. He would strengthen what I've been saying all along. He would confirm to you guys, he'd confirm to you that what I have been telling you, that I don't have anything, that my integrity, there's not sin in my life, my integrity, but my relationship with God is right. And I don't have an explanation. I don't know why that he's allowed this trial in my life. And right now, it's so difficult, it's so hard, and his hand is so much upon me that I go forward. He's not there. Or at least that's how it seems. I go backward. I cannot perceive him. I've looked. I can't see God in all this. On the left hand where he doth work, but I cannot behold him. He hideth himself on the right hand that I cannot see. That's sometimes what happens with trial. We just don't know. I tell people, I use this expression a lot. I don't have answers. I don't. Tonight I thought of Demarius, Jeff. 20-year-old. And if she can get on tonight, I had her in mind, not preaching at her, but preaching to encourage her. And to preach to all of us, because there are going to be things that we go through in our Christian life, and we're going to have no answers. We're going to have no perception of where God is in it. And we will have people, different names, different faces, that will address it, because everybody has an answer for us. Everybody has solutions for your problems. Okay, they really do. Okay, And they know how to fix your trials. Well, you wouldn't be sick if you just eat this. Well, you know what? It's okay. But healthy people die too. Every day. They bury them. I've buried them. When it's our time and it's God's time for us, you can't keep yourself alive. Some of the healthiest people that you would think, just for no reason, die. So when it comes your turn, and you feel like heaven is shut off, and you go forward or you go backward, you look on the left and you look on the right, and from your perspective, God is not visible. I want you to listen to what Job says. But He knoweth the way that I take. Even though I can't see Him, even though I can't perceive Him, even though I have not been able to see Him on the left or see Him on the right or see Him on the left, or wherever I go in my life, I can't seem to see Him. He is always there. And He knoweth